Governor's Office in Transition, an ABC 17 News special with MissouriNet, starts now.
And thank you for joining us for this very special report on KMIZ. I am Joey Parker, and I'm joined by Brian Houseworth of MissouriNet, used to be with KMIZ. And Brian, this is quite a day.
Well, it is. It is a historic day, Joey. There is no doubt about it. You and I just had someone tweet at us as they saw our picture, and the person said, somebody who's well-respected in Jeff City, he said, this is not a time of celebration. It's not, but it's historic nonetheless. You have a governor who has served for about a year and 5 months. You and I were just, it seemed like yesterday, you and I were on the Capitol lawn in the cold, and our feet were cold. It was a very cold day. I remember that. And again, the Republicans appeared to be unified. I can remember Governor Greitens and Attorney General Hawley up on the stage together, and then look was what has happened. And then now we have Mike Parson, who'll be sworn in as the 57th governor. Right
now what you're looking at is a live prayer service, and this is a private prayer service. We are allowed in with the camera just to show the incoming governor at this prayer service. He wanted just family to be there because, as Brian just said, he's calling this a solemn occasion, but an occasion of healing and moving forward. But this is not a time to celebrate. And but of course, he is due an inauguration of some sort. Now, I was talking on the air about how doing something like what Governor Greitens did in 2017 is impossible right now with the $30 million refurbishing of the Capitol. It would just be impossible to accommodate those people.
Well, and it would be literally impossible because there's nowhere for everybody to stand. There's nowhere to park. I mean, even today, Bass Pro has this big event out on the Capitol lawn. What's left of the Capitol lawn, there's not much. So that would be impossible. But what they can do, Joey, and I have talked to Kelly Jones. Kelly Jones is Mike Parson's spokeswoman. She says there will be a reception. Details on that are still being worked out. That reception will not be tonight. It'll be at a later date where the public will be able to get to meet the new governor. But as far as anything big like that we saw with a B-2 stealth bomber flying over, that's not going to happen.
But he's going to do something for the people, obviously, because it is what the people want, and he is the state's chief executive officer, and he answers to the 6 million plus Missourians.
He does, and there are people, I've had people that have asked us, is there going to be an event? They want to meet him. They want to hear what he has to say. You and I are familiar with him. We've covered him for a number of years. He is someone who is a farmer, but as far as, I've talked to him many times over the years, Joey, about agriculture, primarily law enforcement issues. There's a lot of issues that we just don't know about him in terms of a statewide perspective.
Right, and we're going to find out more, but let's just review the sound from the moment that pretty much led us here, and that is the governor's resignation.
Today, I am announcing that I will resign as governor of Missouri effective Friday, June 1st at 5 p.m.
And that is, of course, less than an hour away, that when the governor's resignation is official. Now, on the way to Jefferson City today from Columbia, I called the Secretary of State's office, and at that time, they still didn't have his resignation letter, so it's not official. I mean, we've even talked about he could wait till 4:48 and say, I want to stay. And constitutionally, there's nothing that can be done about that.
That's exactly right. I don't expect that because we saw two men in a truck over there moving things out at the mansion today. But you are absolutely right. Theoretically and constitutionally, he could. Here's the other thing, Joey, that I think is significant about today, and it's been a historic is not an overused word. It is historic. The governor today announced several clemencies and commutations. Rodney Lincoln is huge, and as I reported today, on any other day, Rodney Lincoln, who's incarcerated here in Jefferson City at the maximum security prison, that would be a lead story. That's a national story, and yet with the weekend coming up, it's going to, as I say, get kind of buried in the news because of just everything going on.
It does make you wonder, though, why he waited until the last day of his governorship to do something like that if he knew it was the right thing to do. But, again, who knows the mind of a politician or this governor?
And to be fair, Joe, your point's well taken, but to be fair, every governor I've ever covered, with the exception of one, has always waited until the very end to commute a sentence, Republican and Democrat. One exception of that, 1999, Pope John Paul II came to St. Louis. I covered it at the Trans World Dome. Yes, that's what it was called. And the Pope had a private meeting with Governor Carnahan, whispered into his ear, quote, "Have mercy on Mr. Meese." And within hours, Daryl Meese's sentence was commuted. That's the only time I've ever seen it during an actual, not the end of a term.
Right. Of course, Governor Nixon did commute the sentence of Jeff Mazansky.
That's
that
right.
was a story we covered quite a bit, and that was well before the end of his term. When we put the question to Mike Parson, who was working on the farm and got notified a little bit earlier, I'm sure, and had to drive from Bolivar to the Capitol, we asked him if he was ready to become governor and lead the state, and this is what he said.
Because I do have a public service career, that I've been here, I understand that one of the great things that probably happened when I presided over the Senate, most of the legislation I'm aware of. So that's an advantage for me. But, we got good people. We're going to be ready to go.
And I hate to be corny, but that's the new sheriff in town. It had to be said. Of course, he was the former sheriff, and he served a couple terms in the House and then in the Senate, and then elected lieutenant governor.
Yes, he did. He was the sheriff of Polk County, which is the Bolivar area, from 1993 to 2005, elected to the House in 2004, reelected in 06 and 08. The Senate seat down there opened up in 2010. He was reelected in 14, and then he actually had a 4-year term. He kind of had a free shot at the lieutenant governor. Had he lost that race in 16, he still would have had 2 years left in the Senate. So he had an opportunity there. He ended up winning 110 out of 114 counties in Missouri.
It's a landslide.
Landslide, absolutely. And Mike Parson received more votes than any other lieutenant governor in Missouri history. That's significant.
And another thing that's interestingly significant is Mike Parson and Eric Greitens could not be more polar opposite.
Right.
This is a guy who did it the way a lot of people here in Jefferson City think it should be done, and a lot of voters think it should be done. And of course, Eric Greitens came in as the outsider, a political neophyte. Nobody knew much about him, but he looked good on paper. And in his ad. Well,
when he was shooting that machine gun, and that obviously, in many ways, it propelled him. People, especially in the Republican base, they really did well. I still think, and I've talked about this with you multiple times, I think it was the boot heel in both of those races that carried him over the top. He spent a lot of time down there, Portageville, the steel mill, places like that. That was significant. Won a 4-way primary. He was a big underdog in that race, beating Peter Kinder and Catherine Hanaway, even John Bruner. And then Chris Koster, I covered Joey, August 2016. I was at the Farm Bureau, Missouri Farm Bureau. Let's be honest, they've always endorsed Republicans. They always do. Yet they endorsed Chris Koster in the gubernatorial race.
I remember when I saw that, I was shocked.
Oh, it was huge. And the convention of wisdom was Koster's going to win. And lo and behold, Koster did not win. So Greitens came in. But your point is well taken. Parson is an insider. He is an insider. He is someone who knows how to cut deals. He works with Democrats. Eric Greitens did not. He did not work with Democrats, and he did not get along with his own party.
And speaking of which, Gail McCann Beatty, who is a Democrat, this is what she has to say about Michael Parson.
So he definitely understands Jefferson City and the political process, and I think he will surround himself with people that will give him good advice. When you're in that second in command, you know that at any point in time you may have to step in. So I think he has prepared himself for that. I think he will be approachable by Democrats and Republicans, which is a good thing. And I think he will lead with integrity.
He will be approachable by Democrats and Republicans. Once again, she was talking about Mike Parson, but it was and could be interpreted as a slam to Eric Greitens. You asked her a question about how many times they had met.
Oh, that was it. That was the first day of the session, and you were there, and you used the soundbite. I asked Gail McCann Beatty. This is way before we didn't know about the controversy at the time. No, and when media says it was a big secret. We didn't know about it. It may have been known in St. Louis, but not here. So I asked her at the beginning of session, how often do you and how often do your caucus members meet with Governor Greitens? They all laughed hysterically.
Right.
They could not stop laughing. And that laughter continued probably 10 seconds. And then she paused and she said, let me think about that. And more or less she said, there's nothing for us to talk about. So that tells you something. I thought that was significant.
And she didn't have to think about it.
But she did say she had to think about it.
Right, because they definitely tried. But the interesting thing is, and especially when he needed his party to get behind him, he ostracized so many members of his own party with this go-it-alone approach. I often call it a maverick approach. He treated the media the same way. He thought he could often just not talk to us and bring his message to his constituents through Facebook and Twitter. And we know that's a reality, and it has its advantages. But once again, Facebook, you can cherry pick the questions. You cannot cherry pick questions with a good journalist.
Well, and I think the key is a journalist who asks probing questions. Joey, I will disagree with you a little bit on this, respectfully, and I think it's good to have this discussion. Governor Greitens' office did reach out to me. This is way before the controversy. Once January happened, there was basically no interviews, but they did reach out to me and gave. Because they knew I was interested last year during the special session, and offered me the opportunity to interview him about the steel mill issue and the abortion issue. No restrictions. I was able to ask what I wanted. I grilled him on the issue of the steel mill, and I will say this, he used his talking points, but when I repeated the question several times, he answered it, and he respected that. So I've had, at least on the two issues I was most interested in, the special sessions, I had the opportunity to talk to him. I think what happened once Lauren Traeger had that story in January, everything changed, and I don't remember him speaking to us after that, or anybody.
The one time we had a sit down with him, or at least I had a sit down, other members of ABC 17 News have, but the one time that I pressed and finally got the sit down, I came into his office, and in the, there's the foyer in the waiting area, and I saw the evening anchors of our competition, both evening anchors. So he just did us boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, one after the other.
Style.
And I saw the picture of that, and that was something in usually 10 minutes. And he had a lot of the prepared things that he wanted to say, but at least you had the opportunity. I wish we could have continued to do more of that.
Right.
But I do know exactly what you're saying.
And one of our journalists has remarked about how he makes you feel very important. He's very good about that. He remembers your name. He seems very courteous, great eye contact. Again, he's very polished in that regard, and that's one of the things that makes him so likable to certainly his supporters.
Well, to his base, and
right.
That's huge.
And this is another soundbite from his resignation speech.
I will always be a fighter for the people of Missouri. A great deal of work is left undone. The time has come, though, to tend to those who have been wounded and to care for those who need us most. So for the moment, let us walk off the battlefield with our heads held high.
His voice broke up a bit when he talked about it's time to tend to those who are wounded.
Yes.
And that was the first time we've heard, or at least I have, him, again, this tough Navy SEAL, breaking up a little bit. But again, when you're resigning as governor, not even 2 years into your term, I think that would make just about any grown person choke up a bit.
He did, and I'm not sure because he didn't get into specifics. I don't know if he was referring to people on his staff. I don't know if he was referring to his wife Sheena, the kids. I don't know because he didn't take questions. But yes, that stuck out to me as well. If you look at, and I was actually with Senator Blunt as that was going on. I was with Senator Blunt just a few miles from here at Ames, so I didn't see it. But I did watch one television station in St. Louis actually froze the video. Sheena Greitens was standing right behind that door.
That picture's gone quasi-viral, I think, and I've seen that, and it is a haunting image in that regard because, in all of this, you have to remember that human beings have been harmed in all these transactions. We get caught up in the legalese a lot and the politics of it, but this, there was a marriage destroyed. There was a marriage that certainly had its tribulations, but they said they worked through it. But again, it's all dragged out in the public. Everybody in the entire state knows it, in the entire country in this case, because Governor Greitens did have higher ambitions. He locked up Greitens for president. What was it, 2009, I believe?
Absolutely. He did that, and he had ambitions. And remember, too, at one time, Governor Greitens was a Democrat. And, if you look at some of the media accounts, he had considered even running as a Democrat in a congressional race in 2010 against Blaine Luetkemeyer. He was a delegate at the Democratic National Convention. So if you look back, your points are all well taken about the emotions and the things. But let's not forget one key thing about 2016. Greitens wins the race. He was the Republican, a former Democrat. Koster lost the race, a Democrat, a former Republican. Chris Koster, remember, he was a state senator from Harrisonville, one of the most conservative Republicans in the entire body, and he ended up switching and becoming a Democrat. That almost is forgotten about.
Yeah, it is. And another person who came in was Josh Hawley. Josh Hawley was a University of Missouri professor. He argued the Hobby Lobby case a bit. He worked on that case. He's never held office before, and he too wrote in on this throw the bums out and let's bring in some fresh faces, some outsiders to fix things. But as you said, they walked down the steps together during inauguration, but now this situation with Governor Greitens could be causing him some political issues. But let's hear what Josh Hawley had to say about this transition.
It's a new day in Missouri. I'm confident that the incoming governor is going to do a great job. We look forward to working with him, and I look forward to seeing all you guys along the way. Thank you.
A new day for Missouri.
I thought that was significant. He was at the lieutenant governor's office today. I was one of the reporters who was there, and J.C. Simmons of ABC was ABC 17 was right next to me. A new day for Missouri. He said that the lieutenant governor was prepared. He enlightened us a little bit. He said they briefed him on some cases. There's 42,000 cases, Joey, civil and criminal. The other thing I think that was significant about what he said today, a reporter asked him about the Senate race, because he didn't want to talk about that, but the reporter pressed. And Hawley was getting ready to leave, but he answered the question, and he said, paraphrasing here, he said that Claire McCaskill shamelessly, his words, politicized this issue, spent $3 million along with Senator Chuck Schumer, and he criticized her for that. He said that she's the one that's played politics. So there's no question that there's a battle there between Claire McCaskill and Josh Hawley. Could determine if McConnell or Schumer is the majority leader. And the other thing, keep in mind this, there are some Greitens supporters who are upset with Hawley. He has taken some heat in the Republican Party for his position.
He really has. Let me just take a glance back here. Brian, have you ever seen that crowd outside the governor's door? And no matter what it is, whether it be an inauguration, a new governor, a scandal, I've never seen that many reporters outside the governor's office.
No, I haven't. And I walked down there right before we took the airwaves, and I guess the folks at home can see right behind us and see exactly what we can see. And I was told they try to open up the doors at 5:01. I've not seen anything quite like that. The only thing that might compare to it, two things would be the night that the first special investigative report was issued. That was, but they weren't up here. They were on a different floor, so not here. The night Governor Carnahan's plane crashed, that was a tragic night. It happened in the middle of the night. They did a press conference here late overnight. Roger Wilson was involved. A number of other people were involved. There was a lot of media there for that, but a lot couldn't make it just because of the time of the night it was. But it was similar to that.
Well, and of course, when Governor Carnahan was killed in that plane crash, it allowed Lieutenant Governor Roger Wilson to become governor for only a short time.
Yeah.
And that was a difficult time. In fact, I wasn't even in the state, but I was following the coverage. I anchored it. I talked about it in our state where I was, and it wasn't even Missouri. It was a huge story, if you remember, at that time. Now, speaking of vacancies, we're going to have a vacancy, and that's going to be the Lieutenant Governor's office, and this is what Mike Parson had to say about that.
Is there any idea how the next lieutenant governor will be selected?
I do not. I do not. We haven't even crossed that yet at this point. Missouri is much larger than any one elected official, so I look forward to Missouri is going to come together. We're going to move forward, and that's what my job is going to be as a leader, and our other leaders in this state will step up and we'll lead this state.
Have you spoken to Governor Greitens?
I have not.
Well, there he is, the incoming governor, knowing about as much as we do about how they're going to select a new lieutenant governor.
Well, and there's nothing in the statute that we can point to that really is going to give us a definitive answer on that. Speculation, and I watched Barry Mangold's story the other night, speculation, and I've heard it as well, is that Mike Kehoe is being considered for that position. I know the former speaker and now the pro tem of the Senate, Ron Richard, obviously supports him. But you know, Joey, this issue actually came up as a hypothetical at a budget hearing I covered back in January. Jay Ashcroft and Josh Hawley were the witnesses, and there was a Democratic rep, Peter Meredith from St. Louis, that kept saying, I want to ask a hypothetical question. If a hypothetical governor is gone and the lieutenant governor takes over, does the lieutenant governor's point, is that appointed or is it a special election? And Jay Ashcroft, as I recall, answered that will probably end up in the courts. And it may, because you can't find anything in statute to see how that would be addressed.
Do you think if the Republican leadership agrees on a candidate that it could still go to court?
I think someone could. I think it's possible. And it's impossible for me to predict, but there could be a question, do they have the authority to appoint? Sure. They very well may. I don't know. I'm not a judge, but I can tell you this. Somebody's going to challenge that.
Right. It may not be even a member of the General Assembly. It could just be a citizen could do this.
It could be Mary Jo Smith from Eldon.
Right. Well, it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. But I would think in the next session, it's very likely they'll work this out through legislation in a constitutional amendment, do you think?
I think it's very possible constitutional amendment. You know, Jason Smith, the congressman, and you've interviewed him a number of times, as have I. Years ago, he had a bill to address this very issue, and it never went anywhere. It had nothing to do really with politics. I know there was a similar bill this year, but he wanted it, I think he wanted a special election called to do it. Now, keep in mind, there were Democrats in charge there, but he wanted, and that bill never got anywhere. The difference between 2000, when Governor Carnahan's plane went down and Roger Wilson became governor, Joey, and now is you've got basically 2.5 years of a term left. When Roger Wilson became governor, that was October of 16.
Not even 90 days.
Exactly. The other big difference is the Highway Patrol had to protect 3 families then. They had to protect Mrs. Carnahan. They had to protect Roger Wilson and his wife, who were from Columbia, the governor and his wife. And in November, they had to protect Bob Holden, his wife, and their 2 small children at the time. So that was pretty stressful on them. This one, not so much.
Right. And I'm amazed at how quickly it's almost like the White House in that regard, that the president leaves to go to the swearing in of the new president, and while they're doing that, the White House has cleaned out of the family's items, and the new families all put up, they say, even the toothbrushes in the slot for the new president when they get back from the ceremony, the swearing in, all of these things.
Yes.
And I was surprised how quickly the family seems to be leaving the governor's mansion.
I am too. I thought it would take a little bit longer. There was a question that came up this week. Speaker Richardson was asked about it, how soon Governor Greitens had to be out of the mansion. He did not really want to answer it. He didn't know. But, 2 men in a truck were out there. The firm that was helping to move, there were boxes. So it looks like it's going to happen. Elisa Nelson, my colleague, was with soon-to-be Governor Parson about an hour ago.
Right.
He indicated they're going to take a walkthrough of the mansion tomorrow. And Lisa also said and reported at the time that the Greitens had almost moved out. So I don't think that's going to be an issue, but you're right. It takes time. Generally speaking, and I can't speak for the patrol, we don't know, but generally speaking, they'll get a new security detail. That is traditional. But just think about this for a minute. 1 week ago, a little over a week ago, soon-to-be Governor Parson was at the Boone County 911 Center in Columbia. Kelsey Kernstein and I were there to meet him. We interviewed him. His wife, his daughter were with him. One person was driving him as chief of staff. No security. A week, he gets out of the car. I walk right up to him. Now I couldn't do that. I mean, I couldn't do that. Everything changes. His life is going to change completely. I think he's aware of it. I don't know I don't know if he really understands how big it's going to be. It's a huge deal.
He's going from the ranch in Bolivar to the governor's mansion. But again, he says he's ready. Let's hear again from incoming Governor Mike Parson.
You know, I feel good right now. I feel good, and we're going to be fine in the future, and we're going to move Missouri forward.
He feels fine. He feels good. We're going to move Missouri forward, he says. And again, he knows the movers and shakers in this building. I was on an elevator with some lawmakers who had some boxes in their hands, and they were termed out. And they were lamenting the fact that they said, one more term, we could have gotten so much done. And all these new faces in here that are just going to have to learn the ropes instead of getting things done. And, you know, that's the thing about term limits. The argument is that the most experienced people get termed out when they could possibly get a lot done for their constituents.
It takes about 2 years to really understand, even where some joke where the bathrooms are and stuff like that, and to learn. You know, and Joey, Chris Kelly will tell you, the former House Budget Chairman, there were things, he'd been there 20 years, there were things he learned every day about the budget. So that is a great point, and 8 years is how long you can serve one person in the Missouri House, 8 years in the Senate for a total of 16. But that's a little misleading. Very few end up going to the Senate. There's about 5 or 6 reps for every senatorial district. Only one comes out. Sometimes it's not even a person who's been in the House. Sometimes Senator Kurt Schaefer had never served in the House. So yeah, that is an interesting point. And one more point too about Mike Parson in the soundbite he gave you. Kansas City, if you look at the coverage there, television, radio, print, there are a lot of comments from primarily Democrat. It's a Democratic city, not quite as much as St. Louis, still Democrat. But a lot of their leaders were critical of Eric Greitens. They felt like he did not spend enough time over there. Again, that's what they told the media there. But they said that Parson would listen. They're hopeful they'll be able to get that conservatory project done in Kansas City, some other things as well. And one of the first calls that Mike Parson made this week was to Kansas City Mayor Sly James. That's big. He also talked to Lyda Cruzan, 2 very prominent Democrats.
Right.
He called Lacey Clay, the congressman from St. Louis, Democrat, and Emmanuel Cleaver. So I focused a lot today on the fact he met with Josh Hawley. That's significant. But it is also significant that he had these meetings, and I believe all more phone calls, with Democrats. Claire McCaskill, too. I can't forget her.
Right. And, you know, it's interesting because in 2013, Time magazine named Eric Greitens on its list of the 100 most influential people in the world. In 2014, Fortune magazine had him as one of the world's 50 greatest leaders. And this week we saw him step down. And these days, you know, you don't write a political obituary for anybody, but it is hard to see how there will be a comeback.
You know, I don't, and again, interesting about those numbers, and a best-selling author. I mean, his books are pretty good reads. I mean, I've read at least a couple of them, and parts of a couple of them, read one for sure, the full amount. But, you know, we'll see if time changes anything. I don't know. I don't think that's something he's focused on right now. But here's the other thing. There are Republican voters who defend him strongly, that feel like he had been railroaded by Kim Gardner, that feel like he had been railroaded by the swamp, as they term it. He had support. I don't think it would have been enough in the next election, but he definitely, well, you know it in the newsroom, the calls and things you get. Greitens has support out there. Most of that is in the rural areas.
All right, Brian, we're going to have a lot more to talk about. We've got about 20 seconds left in this. I want to thank you so much for being a part of this. You know, we could talk about this all day long and into the night.
We could do 4 hours.
All right. Brian Houseworth from Missouri Net, thank you again for your cooperation and for all you've done. And again, we'll be talking with you again as the new governor takes office and as the former governor, soon to be's legal troubles continue, because those aren't quite over.
Yeah, those aren't, and I appreciate. Thanks for having me on, Joey. Good to see you.
Thanks. And stay with us for ABC 17 News at 5.